that we will primarily be dealing with women's issues, and with women's issues, balanced hormones are the key to optimum health and wellness. And if a woman's hormones are out of balance, it has a domino effect on the rest of the woman's life. So that we believe that with education, with some tools, that most women and men can achieve hormonal balance. Now, I'll be doing a man's seminar, or a seminar for men, on June the 22nd. And so we will reserve any comments about men and their hormone challenges for that time. So let's talk about Hormones 101. How does a person's body make hormones? Well, it might come as a surprise that all of the sex steroid hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, and even cortisol, are primarily manufactured from cholesterol in our body. Now, cholesterol sometimes gets a bad rap because it appears that in the health realm that if you have too much cholesterol, it will increase your risk of heart disease. But it's also dangerous to have too little because, in fact, without adequate cholesterol, we would not be able to live, and our body would not be able to produce an adequate amount of hormones. So cholesterol is really the primary or the main building block for all of the hormones that our body produces. From cholesterol is produced pregnenolone. Now, pregnenolone is a precursor hormone. It is a precursor to progesterone, as you can see with the arrow going down. It seems to be that pregnenolone may only be a catalyst hormone. We have seen experiments where a person's been given pregnenolone. It doesn't necessarily bring up the progesterone level in their body, and so we really don't, in truth, understand because we have not seen many studies on this particular hormone, but we do know that it is the precursor in the steroid pathway to the production of progesterone. Now, progesterone is a very important hormone in the pathway. It gets its name because it is the pro-gestation hormone for a woman who is embarking on a pregnancy. So it's actually the hormone that maintains or keeps the pregnancy. At the end of a pregnancy, a woman's body is producing from 20 milligrams in a normal ovulatory cycle as much as 300 or 400 milligrams of progesterone daily. It is low progesterone at the end of a pregnancy that studies have shown produces preterm babies, or babies that are born prematurely. Every woman on the call probably knows some woman who has begun a pregnancy and not been able to carry her pregnancy past the first trimester. And usually that spontaneous abortion will be attributed to low progesterone. Her body's inability to produce an adequate amount of progesterone to keep that pregnancy. From progesterone is produced cortisol. Cortisol progesterone is a precursor to cortisol, and I probably at this point, cortisol is what we call the stress hormone. I could ask everyone listening to the call, what's your stress level like? Dr. Lee believed that stress was the main reason why women's hormones were out of balance. And so, you want to think of cortisol as kind of the backup energy system that's been created. It's like the batteries that back up your electronics. When the electrical power goes out, you can't just keep going. We're not the Energizer Bunny then any longer. So you can't keep giving them your full power. They will wear out. And we also lose our source of energy. And the same thing holds true for cortisol. We can't depend on cortisol and our adrenal glands, which produce this cortisol, to keep taking us beyond our physical limits, because eventually we will create depleted organs and chronic fatigue. And I have to be honest that that's very common today. The other thing to note here is that cortisol and progesterone compete for the same receptors in the cells. And so if you're overproducing cortisol because you're under a lot of stress, it impairs your body's progesterone activity. And it does set the stage for estrogen dominance, which Dr. Lee talked about and we'll talk about later on. So with progesterone being a precursor to cortisol, and men and women becoming stressed out to the max, and their bodies needing to make more cortisol just to keep them afloat on a daily basis, this could mean that the adrenals, when they kick in to produce that additional cortisol, may not have an adequate amount of progesterone to rely on to improve that production. And this really and truthfully may be one of the reasons why a lot of women today have low progesterone levels. When we do evaluations, we see that pretty commonly. Women are just under a lot of stress today, and so the amount of cortisol that their body's kicking out is just huge. And ultimately, the adrenals fatigue under this stress. They weren't intended to be constantly producing cortisol, and so we see adrenal fatigue that has its root beginnings in excessive cortisol production and low progesterone. Let's move on and talk about testosterone. And testosterone is produced from progesterone again. Testosterone is one of the strongest male sex hormones, or androgen hormones as we call them. You know, testosterone plays a dramatic role in also many aspects of a woman's physiology and in her quality of life, including things like libido, sexual satisfaction. It helps to improve bone density. It improves or contributes to our whole sense of well-being. Has a connection to our vasomotor symptoms, otherwise termed hot flashes, and generally with our body composition. We notice that women that are androgen dominant share some similar characteristics in that they will thicken in the waist, they will develop often hair loss, and they will have things like acne. So excess testosterone is not our goal. We want just the right amount. Now, testosterone levels can decline at menopause. There's a slight decrease in this production, and the word is slight. It's important here because the lower amount of testosterone is less important than the fact that the ratio of testosterone to estrogen and progesterone changes for women. So when we're looking at testosterone, it is in fact stimulated by insulin resistance. So although testosterone levels normally in menopausal women slightly decreases, we also see a dramatic increase in women who suffer from insulin resistance. So we'll come back at that in a little while, but just know that overconsumption of carbs, developing insulin resistance, has an effect on testosterone by producing too much. So we tend to see women with excess testosterone, not deficiencies. All right, so then from the androgen hormones, estrogens are produced. And I don't say estrogen because there really are three main forms of estrogen. E1 is estrone, E2 estradiol, and E3 is estriol. I'll come back to those three estrogens in a moment, but I want to talk about how they are produced in the body, and then we'll go into each one individually. The body produces estrogen in three main ways. Number one, in the ovaries of a menstruating and ovulating woman. Number two, in the adrenal cortex of women. And in fact, the adrenals are the auxiliary or the backup system for the production of estrogen. If we go back now and identify that a woman, her adrenals may be focused on producing cortisol, then her adrenals may not be up for the job of producing a little bit of extra estrogen as she ages. But fortunately, there's a third way that our body produces estrogen, and that is in our fat cells. This probably wasn't the best news that you've ever heard in your life, but here it is anyways. Our body is capable of taking androstenedione, androgen hormone, and converting it to estrogen. This takes place in our fat cells, and so technically what happens is the fat cells in our body become estrogen manufacturing plants and storage vats. Now, if some of you are, as my live audiences are, thinking, well, how fat do you have to be to kick this in? Dr. Lee said that all you had to have is about 10 pounds excess body fat to have an adequate amount of estrogen being produced. And so you might want to ask yourself, if you're over the age of 25 and on this call, ask yourself, what was your weight at 25? Have you gained as little as 10 pounds excess body fat? If you gained more than 10 pounds, there's every possibility that you may never need estrogen. And so if you've been put on an estrogen supplement, it could be ODing you, taking you over the edge to too much estrogen. So let's talk about each of the three forms of estrogen. Estrone is E1 estrogen. It's primarily made, again, in the adrenals under the influence of an enzyme called aromatase. So what happens in our fat cell is our body takes androstenedione, androgen hormone, or testosterone, and under the influence of aromatase enzymes converts it to estrogen in the fat cells. Now, this is a similar conversion to what takes place in men's bodies as well. And this is the main reason for the elevation of E1 estrogen in our body. And this is the main estrogen that women are producing as menopausal women. This is also the estrogen that goes back and forth between E2 estrogen, which is a very potent estrogen, which is responsible for most of the estrogen-related cancers in our body. In perimenopausal women, premenopausal women, estrone levels generally parallel that of estradiol, but after menopause, again, this estrone E1 estrogen could actually increase and become excessive. Estradiol is E2 estrogen, and when we talk about estrogen in general, this is the estrogen that most people are thinking of. It's produced, again, from testosterone. It is the most potent form of estrogen that is produced in our body, and it is also produced from our ovaries before menopause. Estradiol levels fall after menopause or after a hysterectomy where the ovaries are removed. And because women are having fewer menstrual cycles, it's resulting in less exposure to estradiol because the fewer menstrual cycles happens when fewer and fewer women are they're using the birth control pill. More and more women are using the birth control pill and then having fewer menstrual cycles, because while you're on the pill you don't have a menstrual cycle. Early menstruation, late menopause, delayed childbirth, all of these increase a cancer risk with this form of estrogen because it increases, again, the number of it increases with the number of menstrual cycles. There's a third estrogen. It's a very weak estrogen, and it's called E3 estrogen. It's called estriol. Some of the doctors have labeled it the forgotten estrogen. Dr. Eldridge Taylor, a physician, suggests that research about estriol has benefits for bone density, heart health, MS, postmenopausal urinary tract health, vaginal health as well could have been included there. And this is the form of estrogen in a cream form that Dr. Lee recommends in his book, What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Breast Cancer, when he recommends if some women actually need a little bit of estrogen for vaginal health or urinary tract health, this would be the form of estrogen that he would recommend be compounded into a cream, because it doesn't ever go back up the pathway. It always remains a weak form of estrogen, not cancer-causing. So again, our body produces a large amount of estrogen in a variety of ways with a variety of forms. Our body produces progesterone, however, in only two ways. In the ovaries, and a woman would have to ovulate in order to have progesterone be produced through this method. And where the egg leaves the ovary, the little nest it leaves from, is what produces the progesterone. And the egg has to leave the ovary. In other words, you have to pop an egg. You have to release an egg at ovulation in order for progesterone to be produced. And Dr. Pryor, Geraldine Pryor, endocrinologist at the University of British Columbia, and other researchers like her are suggesting that there are more and more anovulatory cycles happening amongst younger and younger women. So we're seeing 20 to 30-year-old women who are not producing progesterone through the ovarian production. The second way of producing progesterone would be the way that most menopausal women would produce progesterone, because they are no longer ovulating. And so the adrenals are supposed to kick in, produce a little bit of progesterone just to get us through menopause. But what we're finding is, again, that women are under tremendous adrenal stress. And so their adrenals are focused on taking their progesterone and producing cortisol instead of producing additional progesterone through this adrenal cortex. And so we understand that there often are progesterone deficiencies in women. That was perhaps where they thought there would be estrogen deficiencies, they are not. They are progesterone deficiencies. We know that small amounts of progesterone are produced in brain, but the adipose tissue does not make progesterone. So for the most part, we are progesterone deficient. Some of the things that progesterone does, it opposes the hormone estrogen. And so in doing that, progesterone slows the normal and abnormal cell growth, and while it's still balancing the effects of estrogen. This is a very important point to make here. To protect our tissues from all of the estrogen that our body produces, that we encounter environmentally, and that we encounter in our food chain, we need to have an adequate amount of progesterone because it has this balancing effect. And Dr. Taylor again suggests a study done at Johns Hopkins Medical School revealed that women with a progesterone deficiency were 5.4 times more likely to have breast cancer prior to menopause. Now, again, this study clearly illustrates that breast cancer has an association with a progesterone deficiency. There are certainly other factors, but this is a big one. Provera is the synthetic form of progesterone. Provera was the hormone that was produced by the pharmaceutical industry after Dr. Russell Marker determined that from the saponins of yam and soy you could get all of the hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. They could be manufactured naturally. The pharmaceutical industry was not able to capitalize on that because they couldn't put a patent on the bioidentical or natural forms of or human-made forms of hormones, and so they came up with Provera. Provera is medroxyprogesterone acetate, MPA, and it was Provera that was put together with the Premarin, the horse's urine form of estrogen, and marketed as HRT, Prempro. But I can assure you that Provera was never the same as progesterone, and in fact, some of the problems are showing up on the slides here. The synthetic progestins, which, one is Provera, are really probably the reason for most of the symptoms resulting in problems for the Women's Health Initiative study. So recognizing that the synthetic forms of hormones are not the same, they do not act the same, they don't have the same display in a female body as the synthetic versions, I think it's the most important point that I wanted to make here. Women's life stages, there's an age and stage, and at all age and stages, a woman's body is producing hormones. Even children are producing hormones in really small amounts. And Dr. Pryor had an interesting comment to make. She said, young children produce hormones at very low levels. And if you'll notice, young children, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds, operate at a very high level of activity. And she said that she believed that that would be true for women in menopause who operate on appropriately low levels of hormones. But recognize that every stage in a woman's life, hormones can become imbalanced. So let's look at the stages as they are represented here, and let's talk a little bit about what's going on for these women. In adolescence, that's the beginning of puberty. It's where we have the onset of menstruation. Ovulation begins. Sometimes what happens with these young women is their ovulation pattern does not establish itself, and so their hormones are pumping out in an irregular manner. Often what we see is that the myth would be that these young women should be mature, that their body should be mature if they're starting to menstruate. Well, what I've observed with the changes in the stage of when a woman starts to menstruate is dramatic. My mom, who's in her 90s, said that for her age, normal ovulation would start between the age of 16 and 18. Now, I'm in my 60s, and for my group of women, the normal age for onset of menses was between the age of 13 and 14. Now, I have 3 groups of children and daughters in each of the 3 groups, and one group of my children are in their 30s, and that group of young women saw normal ovulation begin between the age of 11 and 12, or pardon me, 12 and 13, 12 and 13. And they saw that with their friends. The next group are in their 20s, and they saw the normal pattern for menstruation beginning between the age of 11 and 12. My youngest daughter, who's 19, saw many of her friends begin to menstruate between the age of 9 and 11. And this seems to be a common pattern, that the age for beginning menses is lowering. And we have to believe that part of that is attributed to the amount of estrogen in our world, the amount of estrogen in our food sources, and so we certainly are not estrogen deficient people. However, what brings along with that is what would be right about saying that a woman, a young girl at 9 has a mature body? So the myth here is that maturity happens with the onset of menses. That is a myth. That is not accurate. Dr. Pryor says that now what we're looking at is another decade in that young girl's life before her body settles down, appropriately ovulates regularly, and her cycle becomes regular. Unfortunately, what a lot of moms do is, if the girl reaches the age of 15 or 16 and her cycle is still irregular, she will be taken to her physician, and the doctor will suggest that she be put on birth control pills. But before we end this call, you'll understand the role that birth control pills play, you'll understand how they work, and why it would be humanly impossible for them to ever cause balance to happen in that adolescent young woman's body. Okay, let's move on. Premenopause. It's interesting to note that all the stages after adolescence, after puberty is reached, all contain the word menopause. And that has shaken up a lot of women in my seminars. And you could further look at that and say they all contain the word men, which is probably also correct. But yes, everything points towards menopause from puberty. Now, with premenopause, these women are in their 20s to 30s. This is the time, it's a wonderful time actually in a woman's life. It's when her cycle begins to settle down. She is regularly menstruating. The assumption or the myth is that regular menstruation equals regular ovulation. And that is just not true. Dr. Pryor and her research has shown that as many as 1/3 of these young women are not ovulating regularly. And that has come to the forefront because of observing infertility issues in this age group of women. These women are regularly menstruating, they are not ovulating. And so the potential childbearing years become fraught with problems of infertility. The resolution to this would be to establish regular menstrual cycles for these young women. The birth control pill might be the primary way that a physician would use, but again, because the birth control pill does not resolve hormonal issues, I personally believe that that's not a very healthy way to approach women who are having a problem with their menstrual cycle. Polycystic ovarian syndrome can rear its ugly head at this stage. PCOS is the development of cysty ovaries, and cysty ovaries result when the body tries to pop an egg, has plenty of estrogen, and cannot pop the egg. Progesterone is not produced, and the ovary develops cysts on the outside. Dr. Pryor calls this androgen excess because, again, usually it's linked to things like insulin resistance, overweightedness. About 50% of these young women have a weight issue, and so their body will be producing an inordinate amount of testosterone, elevated estrogen, and we will see hormones out of balance for this age group of women, when really this should have been the best years of their lives. Many women walk through this time of their lives with some pretty serious problems developing. Let's move on to the perimenopause stage in a woman's life. This is kind of the new stage, and it replaces the symptoms or the symptoms of menopause that were thought to be menopausal really go into this perimenopausal stage. And then this is a time almost of transition. Perimenopause can actually begin as early as in the early 30s, and it can last until the mid-50s. That probably wasn't really good news for anyone on the call. This could be a lengthy period of time where the cycles are irregular and where symptoms start to evolve. In fact, most of the symptoms that are connected to hormone imbalance start to manifest themselves here. And in perimenopause, the main concern here is that hormone levels, estrogen particularly, is not falling. Dr. Pryor says, in fact, in her research, estrogen levels are going 30% higher than they were in the previous stage. So what we're seeing is high and fluctuating estrogen. So this would be a very inappropriate time for a woman to go on hormone replacement therapy that included elevating estrogen levels. Even when we do evaluations, regardless of whether they're with blood tests, urine tests, or saliva tests, we still are not able to pick up the dramatic fluctuations in estrogen that are apparent in perimenopause. And so usually if estrogen is high, drops down, and goes high again, that will indicate a hot flash for a woman, or it will manifest as a hot flash. So high and fluctuating estrogen is what is really the basis for problems in the perimenopause stage for women. So it is a myth that estrogen levels are falling. That is not true. They are fluctuating. As we get into menopause, the menstrual cycle has to have stopped for 12 consecutive months to be considered a menopausal woman. And once that 12 consecutive months cessation of the menstrual cycle, you know, it was thought that we'd be clear sailing. Now, there was a whole group of people previously, Dr. Robert Wilson, for one, who wrote Forever Young. He thought that we'd be all a group of shriveled up prunes and not very pleasant people to be around as menopausal women because we had such low estrogen. Well, what we're finding at Help for Hormones is that not only are our estrogen levels normal, but sometimes we have very elevated estrogen levels. So in menopause, our ability to produce estrogen in our fat cells is keeping our estrogen levels optimum, or sometimes even too high. What would be the main contributing factor to problems in the menopause area? Why are we developing heart disease? Why are we developing osteoporosis? Why are some women still having hot flashes? The main reason would likely be attributed to low progesterone. And so elevated estrogen, low progesterone, in other words, hormone imbalance, would be main cause in this life stage. And so with regards to bone density issues, with regards to heart issues, it's an imbalance always. And you know, if you remember nothing else about this call, remember that balance is the key. I want to show you what estrogen does in our body. And so you can see that from birth we still have some estrogen, and it starts to fluctuate in the teen years, and that's where this cycle, the menstrual cycle, is irregular, settles out through at the later teens and through the premenopause time. During perimenopause, estrogen levels fluctuate erratically, and that is what sets the stage for hot flashes when estrogen goes up and down and up and down and up and down. And usually, again, this is in the absence of adequate progesterone. And then ultimately, our goal is that estrogen will stabilize at the menopause, during the menopause time. Now, there are different folks that believe that our estrogen levels should stay high, that of a premenopausal woman, all the way through our lives. And that has not been proven out to be truthful information yet. Suzanne Summers would be an advocate of keeping hormones at a level of a 20-year-old. But there's significant evidence to show that it would also put our bodies at risk for excess estrogen with unopposed progesterone to protect our tissues. So one other way to explain this, I want to diagram a menstrual cycle. So I'm going to diagram a 28-day menstrual cycle here. You can do this on a piece of paper with me if you'd like. Now, not because a 28-day menstrual cycle is normal. Anywhere from 24 days to 32 days is classified as a normal menstrual cycle. And when I do this diagram, women usually understand better what's going on hormonally. That's our goal. All right, so halfway in the menstrual cycle, somewhere between day 12 to day 15, perhaps even day 17, a woman ovulates. So ovulation divides the cycle into two sections. From day 1 to day 12 would be what we call follicular phase, and day 15 or 17 to day 28 would be what we call luteal phase. The first thing that happens in this cycle is the body sheds the lining from the previous cycle, and then estrogen starts to escalate. Because the role of estrogen is to grow, multiply, and divide cells. And that's very important to remember, that wherever estrogen is found, it is cell proliferative. So it's proliferating cells in the uterus, in this case, preparing a nice thick lining in the uterus. Now, again, for our illustration, we're not going to have a fertilized egg implanted in the uterus, so estrogen levels will reach a peak at ovulation. The uterine lining should be formed by then, because the lining is formed in response to elevated estrogen, and then the estrogen level will drop at a signal from the brain that says, no, we don't have a fertilized egg implanted in the uterus. Progesterone, on the other hand, is only produced at ovulation, so that for the first almost 2 weeks of the cycle, there is very little progesterone produced or evident. Progesterone is produced at ovulation, so it will spike about mid-cycle, somewhere between day 19 to day 21. And again, if there's no signal from the brain to say that there's a fertilized egg implanted, then the progesterone level falls, signaling the body to shed the lining at the end of the next cycle. In order for a woman to have a normal menstrual cycle, she has to have the rise of estrogen and the fall of estrogen. She has to have the rise of progesterone and the fall of progesterone. If she does not have the rise and fall of these two hormones, then she will not have a regular menstrual cycle. Well, what happened was Dr. Pryor was alerted with some research that she was doing at the University of British Columbia, and she saw that women were not ovulating every cycle. And when a woman didn't ovulate, her progesterone level fell. Now that left high, unopposed estrogen in these women's bodies. And so she began to see that in the last 8 to 10 days prior to the menstrual cycle, these women were starting to show signs of PMS. Today, she says, all symptoms related to PMS have their root beginnings in estrogen dominance or estrogen excess. Now, there's a new study that I came across, and this study is important because menstrual cycle and ovulation disturbances are common during both the beginning and the end of a woman's reproductive life. So we see this in the 20s, and we see this in the late 40s and 50s, where women are menstruating but they're not ovulating. So there's a study out there where they're trying to figure out, you know, what's going on in these women's bodies. And I think that these kinds of studies for women are very, very important. It's amazing to me that women can't tell when they ovulate, for instance. And so that's one of the things the study is going to show. All right, PMS. All symptoms related to PMS are connected to estrogen dominance or estrogen excess. So how do you resolve these issues? Well, do an evaluation. We'll talk about that in a moment. Bring down your estrogen if it's too high and bring up the progesterone if it's too low. The resolution of PMS, it should not be to intervene with birth control pills, because birth control pills stop ovulation. And in doing that, they're not going to resolve the issue at all. It's like putting a Band-Aid over a problem. It's just going to hide the problem. It won't resolve the issues. Do you know anyone who suffers from foggy thinking, irritability, or memory loss? One of the interesting things is that foggy thinking, irritability, and memory loss result when a woman becomes estrogen dominant. So in the presence of very low progesterone. Too much estrogen in the presence of low progesterone. Fibrocysts in the breast, uterine fibroids, and ovarian cysts are present. Listen to this. When estrogen levels are elevated with an absence of progesterone. Well, you want to think now, what does estrogen do in the body? Causes cells to grow, multiply, and divide. What are cysts? They are cells that have grown and multiplied and divided. We know that balancing with progesterone, estrogen levels, will cause the majority of fibroids and cysts to go away. Dr. Georgi Flekas has also recognized that breast tissue has an affinity for iodine. We're going to come back to that in a moment, but iodine deficiency can cause fibrocystic breast disease as well. So there's two contributing factors. One would be estrogen dominance, one would be iodine deficiency. And so fibrocystic breast disease is often characterized by lumpy, painful breasts, generally in reproductive aged women. And you know, the symptoms can occur also in menopausal women who are on estrogen therapy, which indicates that elevating estrogen levels for these women is not going to resolve some of their issues. But there's no question that Dr. Flekas has used iodine. He does an iodine loading insufficiency test, and if the person with fibroids in their breast tissue has low iodine, that seems to go a long way toward helping resolve the issue. In fact, he says that he gets an 89% resolution of the problem. Depression is also a symptom of estrogen dominance. Now, I'm not going to spend time on all the symptoms of estrogen dominance. You can read John Lee's books. There's lots of books on this topic, and I've got an extensive book list at the end of the presentation. But I'm trying to show you that estrogen dominance affects almost every area of a woman's life. There's a study out of Germany that showed that the largest number of receptor sites for progesterone is located in the brain. And you know, progesterone's effects really have, we know, stretched beyond the reproductive and just the endocrine systems. So that that progesterone, which is produced in the brain by the neurons and glial cells in the central and peripheral nervous system, this happens in both male and females. If that progesterone that is produced there, and if the receptor sites there are not filled with progesterone, we could see where some of the things that happen could be connected to depression and anxiety. Although research published to date has focused primarily on progesterone's effect on blunt traumatic brain injury and stroke, and it's very effective apparently, there is evidence that a hormone affords protection from several forms of acute central nervous system injury, including penetrating brain trauma, anoxic brain injury, and spinal cord injury. So, you know, there's research being done utilizing progesterone on brain injury and brain function. For our perspective, we believe that women that suffer from depression and anxiety should be evaluated for low progesterone. And if they do have low progesterone, sometimes just using a little bit of progesterone will resolve their issues. Depression, again, the German study, low progesterone then may be a contributing factor to depression and anxiety attacks. One of the physicians on my DVD, Dr. Baron Grobelar, has a number of patients in his practice who came into him with depression, anxiety, that they said was unusual for them. And so what he did is he evaluated and slowly put them on progesterone, slowly began to take them off of their antidepressants with very good success, I would add. But again, not all depression is related to a hormone imbalance, so you'd have to determine whether or not yours was if you are on an antidepressant. But if a saliva test showed that your progesterone level was low, that would be a pretty good start. Decreased sex drive. I'm not sure what I want to say about this. Remember, I'm the lady who has 7 children at my last count. However, I guess I should say this about that. Dr. Mead the other night made a very specific point about saying that progesterone is a woman's libido hormone. That a woman's libido hormone is not testosterone, and that it is progesterone that spikes at ovulation. Testosterone stays level throughout the whole hormonal cycle, but it is progesterone that spikes at ovulation. And there's some degree of evaluation that says, well, if progesterone spikes at ovulation, so does the desire to have sexual intercourse. In fact, if that didn't happen, I believe that we would have very few children on the planet. And I think that's about all we're going to say about that. But I do believe that if women that are listening are concerned about their libido, that they ought to evaluate their hormones and find out if their progesterone is low. And most of the time, restoring progesterone levels will be all that's necessary to improve libido. All right, and that says it all. Let's talk about osteoporosis and bone loss for just a moment. Dr. Pryor says that in order to have adequate bone produced for all of your life, you need to have a good amount of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And the missing hormone was always progesterone. Progesterone stimulates osteoblast activity, and so that's bone building. Estrogen slows up the breaking down of old bone, so it doesn't necessarily build up new bone. So when all those years that they were giving women estrogen didn't improve bone density pictures. In fact, nor has giving women calcium improved bone density pictures. If you'll understand that for 50 years we've been working in this regard and still have not resolved the issue of osteoporosis, we have to be sort of barking up the wrong tree. Balancing hormones will be the main contributing factor with bone density issues. If you can recognize that peak bone mass is in at a young woman's age, and then our bones begin to diminish, we wonder the diminishing of bone in the perimenopausal age, we believe, has a connection to low progesterone as well. So maintaining appropriate progesterone levels. I have my 90-year-old mom on a little bit of progesterone to maintain bones. Dr. Pryor says that adding a little progesterone for bone building purposes will increase bone density about 12%. And that's better than most of the drugs on the market today. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about thyroid dysfunction, because this seems to be a really serious problem that affects a lot of women. If I'm in any audience, I'll ask women, how many of you are on thyroid medication or have been evaluated for low functioning thyroid? You just wouldn't believe the number of women. It's really a very interesting situation. And again, you know, thyroid hormone is a hormone. Again, it's like dominoes. When one hormone goes down, the other one, it takes the other ones down with it. These are the symptoms that are related to low functioning thyroid. If you have some of these symptoms and go to your physician, your doctor will probably recommend that you have a TSH test. Now, testing TSH levels is testing thyroid stimulating hormone. And basically all they're doing is testing to see if your brain's sending the signal that needs to be sent to your thyroid. The thyroid then is supposed to produce, under the influence of thyroid stimulating hormone, T4, which is the inactive hormone, and T3. What I find is a lot of women have elevated TSH levels, which means their thyroid's working too hard. And the doctor will recommend then that they use some sort of synthetic thyroid hormone, usually Synthroid, levothyroxine, T4, to supplement. The problem with supplementing with just T4 is that it has to convert to T3 in order to become utilized by the body. And so the problem there becomes, do you have whatever is necessary for the conversion of all that T4 that you're being given supplementally into T3? Because the women that I talk to often tell me that for adding the Synthroid, for adding the T4, they don't feel any better. The main ingredient to that is necessary for that interaction is iodine. And so when we look at the symptoms of iodine insufficiency, they're very close to those symptoms that are connected to low thyroid. Things like fatigue, constipation, fibrocystic breast disease, reduced cognition. Those were symptoms that are connected to low thyroid. So there was every reason to believe that there's a crossover here and that perhaps low thyroid really is insufficient iodine. There's a connection between low iodine and our breasts. I already alluded to the fact that there seems to be a connection between iodine and fibrocystic breast disease. But iodine does a lot of things in the breast. So I think that the observation that we could have low iodine because most of us aren't eating salt very much anymore. And I don't want to advocate anyone increasing their salt intake simply to improve their iodine levels. In fact, I believe they put iodine in the wrong food. So we're advocating test for iodine insufficiency, and I hope that at some point Dr. David will have Dr. Mead on talking about iodine and iodine insufficiency. He just makes a very good case in point on this issue. An iodine test is simple. It's easy to do. You can pick up a test kit from helpforhormones.com. It's a 24-hour urine test, and it will help to determine, is your iodine level adequate for the conversion of T4 to T3. Dr. David Brownstein has written a book called Iodine and Overcoming Thyroid Disorders. And anything by Dr. David Brownstein is good, but he really recommends an iodine insufficiency test for anyone who's on Synthroid, because he believes that they always will need a bit of iodine. He also recommends it for anyone who is borderline, who has had a number of tests for low thyroid, and it always comes back to be within the normal range. It could be still low normal and be a factor. I just want to go back for a moment, and I want to read you a few things. Dr. Fleckes is involved with a group called the Iodine Group. You can Google that. And he suggests that iodine introduces apoptosis, which is cell death, and inhibits cells from forming cancer. So he believes that it's an important part of a breast cancer program because of that. He also says that there's a connection between iodine and insulin resistance. And I want to read this study. I thought it was really interesting. He was treating a large 320-pound woman with insulin-dependent diabetes, and they learned a lesson regarding the role of iodine in hormone receptor function. This woman had come via the emergency room with a high blood sugar level. She then started on insulin during her hospitalization, was instructed to use a home glucometer. She was to use her glucometer 2 times a day, and 2 weeks later, she returned to the office for a visit for her insulin checkup. She was informed that during her hospital physical exam, she was noted to have fibrocystic breast disease. See, all of these things kind of go together. She was recommended to start on 50 milligrams of iodine, which is 4 tablets of iodoral. That is also available on our website. If you show to be iodine insufficient, by all means. Don't take iodine unless you know that you need it. 1 week later, she called us requesting a lower insulin level due to problems with hypoglycemia. In other words, her insulin levels were changing under the influence of iodine. She was told to continue to drop her insulin levels. 4 weeks later, during an office visit, her results from her glucometer were downloaded and to her office computer, which showed that her blood sugar was at 98. I praised her for her diligent efforts. She informed me that she had come off her insulin 3 weeks earlier and had not taken any medications due to the lowering of her blood sugar with the use of iodine. I think that we cannot underestimate the value of some of these individual nutrients that seem to be so important. Iodine has effect on just about every area of the body. One of the reasons to evaluate is if you suffer from brain fog. Iodine is essential for the brain, and so it will often be just the one limiting factor. A little bit of iodine, brain fog dissipates. Iodine and hormones, iodine affects estrogen metabolism. So we know that for women that have elevated estrogen or are at risk, it's reported to transform E1 and E2 estrogen to E3 estrogen, and that's a very important thing to do. It takes the very strong estrogens and creates them and helps them to go down the pathway to estrogen that is not cancer forming. Iodine affects the ovarian production of estrogen and also affects estrogen receptors in the breast. On and on it goes. We have an excellent document called The Importance of Iodine in the Body. You can send me an email either from this website or from the website would be probably the best. Just go to helpfulhormones.com and request the information on iodine. I would be more than glad to send it to you, because I think for many, many women it is the missing link to the resolution of their hormone program. Gallbladder disease. You know, on every profile for hormone replacement therapy, ERT, HRT, and for birth control pills is the reference to these hormones will cause gallbladder disease. Now, one of the things that we know, when we take hormones orally into our digestive tract, they are picked up in the bile and as metabolites and can produce stones. They can be converted into stones. We know that the inappropriate way to take hormones is through the digestive tract. That's not what the body does. The body puts all our hormones directly into our bloodstream. And so when we see on product profiles for hormone therapies that they can cause gallbladder disease, gallstones in other words, we know that that it likely is oral dosing that is at the crux of this. What are the causes of hormonal imbalance? Well, you know, the body not producing enough progesterone. That's usually happens when we're not ovulating. Well, what about those of us that are no longer ovulating? We still have an insufficient amount of progesterone in relationship to the amount of estrogen that our body is producing, because most of us have a weight issue. Many of us have more than 10 pounds excess body fat, and if that's the case, then we're overproducing E1 or estrone, which is converting to estradiol. So that's point number 2. Insulin resistance comes into play when we gain weight and when we eat a diet that's not balanced. We talk about eating 40% of our diet as carbs, which would indicate vegetables first, only 2 fruit, because again it's high in sugar, and limiting the whole grains, even restricting whole grains if your tendency is towards weight gain. Eating 30% of our diet as protein and 30% of our diet as essential fats, with the goal of not developing insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is really a dietary problem. Stress or elevated cortisol robs our body of an appropriate amount of progesterone. We need a large amount of progesterone to balance and to help our body with cortisol. So stress becomes a major factor. In fact, the lab that we work with believe that it all begins with stress. Dietary lack of phytonutrients and fiber. Well, fiber, for one thing, is necessary to prevent insulin resistance. And so making sure that the foods that you're eating really look like food and contain a high amount of fiber, I think, is very important in leveling out or balancing your insulin levels. So definitely lack of fiber. Fiber also will transport any excess hormones that are not found in receptor sites, out of the body. And so fiber becomes a very important ingredient in the diet in general. It will take out excess sugars, it will take out excess cholesterol and fats out of the diet. Most cardio programs, any program related to heart health, any program related to diabetes, they're all going to be suggesting improve your fiber intake. Dietary lack of phytonutrients. I believe that we're not getting enough nutrition in our food, and that is the bottom line. We need to eat from a varied source of foods, and they need to be colorful on our plate. And when we're looking at colorful, I don't mean M&Ms, and for Canadians, Smarties. We're talking about fruits and vegetables that from a wide variety. We know that chemicals and pollutants can contribute to an excess of estrogen because there are chemicals and pollutants that can become xeno forms of estrogen. They're estrogens that are like a key that goes in the lock. They block the lock, but they don't allow your own body's estrogen to get in. They sit in that lock and they can OD your receptor sites. So there's lots of things out there. Soy becomes an estrogen form that can become excessive for us. Certainly people that are taking hormone replacement therapy of the conventional form made from pregnant mare's urine, for instance, or from Provera, birth control pills, birth control patches, all contain hormones that will cause a hormone imbalance and cause us to become estrogen dominant. I want to look at the historical perspective. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I want to give you a little bit of background. Dr. Mead did that the other night on the call, alluded to some of the things, but you know, hormone replacement therapy has been in the picture for more than 50 years, and it was only in July 2002 that they did a study that showed that it was harming women. Birth control pills have never been studied, and so there's never been a double-blind, placebo-controlled study on birth control pills, on any of them. Not the pill, not the patch, not the Depo-Provera shot. And so we have to recognize that for the most part, women are guinea pigs in this whole hormone picture. It has not been well studied. So as a perspective, a couple of things to just point out. Bioidentical hormones were first available in 1939, and isn't it unfortunate that instead of just going ahead and not worrying or being concerned about whether or not the hormones were patentable, they began to produce patentable hormones. So they took those bioidentical forms and further chemically altered them and came up with other forms like Provera. And then, of course, equine estrogen in 1942, which is, you know, the beginning of Premarin. Dr. Wilson's book in 1960s and 1970s was tantamount to just being an advertisement for pharmaceutical companies, and that was all brought out later on. Progestins, which were patentable. Progestins are the synthetic form of progesterone. Provera, medroxyprogesterone acetate, those will be. And then finally, micronized bioidentical progesterone approved by the FDA and in Europe. Again, the same forms of identical hormones that were produced in 1939 only approved in 1988. Makes you kind of wonder whose health that they're after and working for sure. The Women's Health Initiative study and the estrogen alone arm are all continuing, you know, and what these studies showed, for instance, they evaluated 16,608 women. These women were healthy. It's the first study of its kind, and it's still considered the gold standard study. But with those healthy women, 41% increase in stroke. And listen to this, for women who had no risk. A 29% increase in heart disease. Again, heart attacks for women who had no risk. The women with the risk were taken out of the study. A doubling of the number of blood clots. And I guess the straw that broke the camel's back and stopped the study 2 years early was the 26% increased risk in breast cancer. There's another study that corroborates this, and that would be a study that was fielded by the Lancet about a few years after this, and they published their results, which were even more dramatic because they didn't use healthy women. And so they even had a death risk in theirs. Certainly the outcomes are interesting on the WHI, but there still are physicians who will say, you know what, you can use it for 5 years. And my thought to that is this was only a 5-year study, and within 5 years these things showed up. Now certainly there was some improvement in hip fractures, some improvement in colorectal cancer and in endometrial cancer. But I personally do not believe that any drug therapy should cause breast cancer or death, and you can see that. The problem with hormone replacement therapy from the North American Menopause Society's perspective, because they still support this, is that Premarin is 15% equilin estrogen, which is an estrogen form that is never found in a woman's body. It is very potent, and so it is not bioidentical. Now, it is natural, so we have to watch the terms here. Natural means it's natural to a horse. One of my OBGYN friends says if you're going to run 6 furlongs at a racetrack, it would be a great supplement. And again, I've heard Christine Northrup say if hay is your main food source, it might work. But it probably isn't for the majority of women on this call. And so, you know, Premarin was not the best form of estrogen to be using. Now, Provera, again, you know, it was originally derived from the saponins of soy and yam. It started out well, but they chemically altered it so that it could have a patent on it. And now, Premarin, or Provera, has 150 listed side effects in the body, whereas progesterone that your body makes doesn't have any. I want to bring up the issue of the birth control pill, because some of you don't realize on this call that all birth control pills contain similar hormones to HRT. Only, listen to this, in larger amounts, 4 to 5 times the amount of hormone to what was in hormone replacement therapy. You know, one of the things that we could have or should have asked in the 60s when the birth control pill first was brought out, we should have asked how it works. All birth control pills work by stopping ovulation. Now, all of you are on the call long enough that if you can envision the menstrual cycle, when you stop ovulation, you stop the production of progesterone. And so because of that, it would be impossible for the birth control pill to balance a woman's hormones when it doesn't allow your body to produce progesterone. And truthfully, all birth control pills don't have a therapeutic benefit. Although they're being touted to have a therapeutic benefit, they were never produced for that. And in fact, as in most medicines, they have a secondary side effect. Their secondary side effect is listed here: the potential for stroke, for depression, and in fact a lot of women are on the pill and on an antidepressant, migraine headaches, breast cancer. There's a 600 times increase in breast cancer for women who have been on the pill. And of course decreased libido. In other words, the want to goes out the window. I have trouble understanding. If we would present this to couples and say, all right, do you want to see her libido leave? Do you want to see her have a stroke? Do you want to see her become depressed and develop migraine headaches? I think that most partners would opt to not do this. It's just that the industry, and it is an industry that produces hormones, is so determined, and this may not be politically correct for women to see this, but I want every woman on this call to understand that suggesting birth control pills to younger and younger women is a problem. Dr. Lee says that if a woman goes on the birth control pill between the age of 18 and, or up to the age of 18 and perhaps even up to 21, her breast cancer risk is 600 times that of a woman who never uses the pill. And truthfully, we are seeing more and more breast cancer at younger and younger ages. The truth, or the tale is not told yet, ladies on the call. And there always will be a price to pay when we try to manipulate our body's hormones with synthetic forms. So what is the solution? I believe in education, and I think that you are to be commended for being on this call tonight. If you weather the storm and stay on to the end, good for you. We have a DVD that explains it in about an hour's time, with another hour of reviews by with a physician as well as an RN in private practice and some testimonies. I really would encourage you, if you want to share this information with others, that is probably the better form to share than the one that you're listening to tonight. Tonight's an overwhelming amount of hormone information. But we do believe at Helpful Hormones in education. It is our focus, it is our goal to educate as many women as we encounter. The second thing would be to evaluate your hormones, and we do recommend saliva testing. We offer this option on helpforhormones.com. You can go onto the website and take a look. But we have 3 forms of test kits that are available there. I personally have offered 8,000 saliva tests to individuals in Canada and the United States. The lab tell me that's more than some physicians are doing in either country. We believe that saliva testing is one of the most accurate ways to evaluate hormones. And this is directly from Dr. Mead. If you were on his call the other night, you will agree that he stated a very excellent case for saliva testing. With saliva, it is possible to get a good measure of the amount of hormones actually available to the tissues, and that's why it's termed bioavailable. This is because hormones must pass through tissue in the cheek to get into saliva. And the hormones in the blood are often bound to proteins. They're lipophilic, and they may or may not be available to tissues. Consequently, blood and serum levels of hormones may not give the best picture of how hormones are behaving at the tissue level. Dr. Mead went on to say further in his presentation that if you are on a bioidentical hormone regime, if you are on bioidentical estrogen, bioidentical testosterone, or bioidentical progesterone, saliva is the only way to evaluate your hormone levels, because bioidentical hormones do not show up in the blood, and they do not show up in urine as well. So urine testing and blood testing, if you're on a hormone balancing program, will not accurately evaluate. So why would anyone test? Well, you would maybe want to see if the symptoms that you're facing are related to a hormone imbalance. Not all the symptoms that we feel within our body are connected to hormones, but it's nice to know if the symptoms that you're facing are related to a hormone imbalance. It will show up in the test. Is a hormone deficiency, is it causing your osteoporosis? That's a question that many women have already been given a diagnosis for osteoporosis. They need to know, well, where are my hormone levels? Dr. Pryor says, in dealing with osteoporosis, number 1, balance your hormones. Number 2, exercise with weight-bearing exercise. Number 3, eat the best you've ever eaten in your life. And then number 4, supplement with a high degree of wisdom. So it's not about calcium, and it is about balance, exercise, eating right, but it is about making sure your hormones are in the right perspective. An adequate amount of testosterone, an adequate amount of estrogen, and an adequate amount of progesterone. Do you need a balancing program? Most women are very intuitive, and I would suggest that the majority of women that are on this call because you have that intuitive thing kicking in saying, you know what, I think this would be helpful for me. If that's you, then advancing towards a hormone balancing program would indicate to start with a saliva test first. We believe in testing and not guessing. If you want to evaluate the current hormone therapy that you're on, and as soon as you go on any type of hormone therapy, you should be evaluating on a regular basis. I've been on progesterone since I was 47 years old, and I do a saliva test annually. Both my husband and I do saliva tests on a regular basis. In the men's seminar that I'll be talking on the 22nd, we'll talk about why men would do a saliva test and what is going to show up on their test results. But we believe both men and women need to evaluate to determine what's happening with your hormones. Otherwise, you're just guessing. Excuse me. What hormones do I test? Well, we have 3 tests that we offer at Help for Hormones. We offer a 2-panel test that tests E2 estrogen and progesterone, and that is a test to determine estrogen dominance. We offer a 3-panel test that tests the above 2 hormones plus testosterone, and this would be for anyone who has a concern about osteoporosis, anyone who is insulin resistant, anyone diagnosed with PCOS, anyone who could have elevated testosterone, or for anyone who thinks they have a low level of testosterone. We offer a 5-panel test, which is used if stress is a factor in your life. And then again, this test adds AM cortisol. Morning cortisol should be high. If you're burning out your adrenals, it's going to be low, and we see that often. And DHEA, which is an androgen hormone, but it has a connection with stress. Testing is really simple. Your test kit is all-inclusive. It comes with 4 little tubes. It's even color-coded. There's a booklet. You can see the booklet up on the screen there. They've done a really good job. There's diagrams, there's writing. They've covered it for the hormonally challenged woman. You should be able to, I guess the key issue is to read the directions. Basically, we spit in a very small tube before breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then bedtime, mail it off to the lab, and the results are emailed to you within 7 days of the receipt of the sample at the lab. So that means that it's really important on the requisition to put your email address legibly so that the lab can transpose it onto the information that goes onto the website. So basically, educate yourself, evaluate your hormones, and then embark on a program to balance your hormones. Well, what happens if your saliva test comes back and says that you are estrogen dominant? You have a low level of progesterone and your estrogen is either high or medium out there. Well, Dr. Lee took a 2-pronged approach to balancing hormones at all times. One of the reasons he endorsed what I do and what I say and our DVD is because he knew that I recognized that if you were to just increase your progesterone a little bit, that you may not resolve your issues, that it would leave your estrogen high and fluctuating, and the only way that we know to modulate estrogen levels is with a good nutritional program. But I know that many of you are interested in progesterone and what it does, so we'll start with progesterone. A proper bioidentical progesterone cream, these are the parameters that Dr. Lee gave in his book, should include 400 to 500 milligrams of USP grade progesterone per ounce of cream. And normally a proper dose is between 20 and 40 milligrams depending on the age and stage of the woman, and we always divide that dose. Progesterone has a half-life of about 10 hours, and so using a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening, very appropriate to keep nice even feed of progesterone. We always apply it to the areas on the body that have the thinnest skin, so where you can see veins and arteries. So the inside of the arms work well, behind the knees, the groin area, the chest area, think of where you blush. So you wouldn't apply progesterone to the areas where there's a lot of body fat. All of us cycle progesterone. Even though we're no longer menstruating, we take 1 week off. The women who are menstruating would only use it in the last half or in luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. Now, if you work with Help for Hormones, anybody on the call who is working with us knows that we give a lot of assistance and help. I believe if you decide that that you're going to do a saliva test and it reveals that you need progesterone, you need to know how to use it. So we have 3 sets of handouts on how to use progesterone appropriately, what to expect, and how to get the most out of your cream, where to apply it appropriately. And you really shouldn't settle for anything less. Progesterone is a hormone. It is available over the counter in the United States. And so it is readily available without a lot of information, but we try to provide clients with as much information as possible. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but men can would benefit from a little bit of progesterone as well, and I'll get into that more in the next webinar that I do on the 22nd of June. But just know that progesterone inhibits the aromatase, or the 5-alpha reductase raising of testosterone, that takes testosterone, converts to estrogen. I think that is happens in women as well, and so progesterone is very important for us in stabilizing our testosterone levels as well. Progesterone does a variety of things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but you can see that it affects a number of areas of a woman's body. Certainly it protects our uterus from cancer. It protects our breast tissue. It prevents our tissues from being exposed to estrogen excess. It helps protect against fibrocystic breast disease. I would say progesterone along with iodine are going to be very helpful for FBD. It increases bone density. Dr. Pryor, Dr. Lee, the doctor on our DVD all allude to the fact that in their medical practice they're seeing increase in bone density without the influence of drugs. It maintains the uterine lining, prevents endometriosis, hydrates and oxygenates the skin. In fact, women that are on progesterone usually have lovely skin. I mentioned earlier that I give it to my mom. Elderly people who were content to just lie in bed all day and couldn't keep track of the conversation with their niece or whatever, after a week or so of being on progesterone, they're up leading discussions on the headlines and the latest in book reviews. Now that's a quote from Dr. Lee's book. And we have seen this with my mom. My mom, she plays poker online and on her computer, not online, but on her computer, and she wins. And she's 91 years old. So as far as brain function, I believe that progesterone is necessary. It also helps protect her bones, and it helps with bone density issues. And so I think for any woman at any age, progesterone, if you are deficient, you should be on it. Something that Dr. Eldridge Taylor says that studies have shown that natural progesterone applied to the skin will alleviate menopausal symptoms in 83% of women. You know, that's the main reason why women went on HRT that caused 26% increase in breast cancer. So progesterone won't cause breast cancer, but it will alleviate the symptoms, probably to a greater degree. And understanding that, I think, frees women up to be much more considerate of this program, for sure. And look at the bottom. Natural progesterone increases libido, and most of these comments are taken from John Lee's books. Dr. Lee would always want me to share with you the 3 things that everyone on this call needs to know about hormones. Number 1, only use hormones if you know you are truly deficient. Number 2, only use bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic hormones. And then number 3, use a dose that would match what is normally found in your body's tissues. So that really suggests that we need to be educated. Only use hormones if you know you're truly deficient. That means you must do a saliva test in order to determine that. Blood values and urine values are not going to do it. Only use bioidentical hormones. So most women are not going to likely need any estrogen or even testosterone, but they may need a little progesterone in their life. And lastly, you'll need to know how much, and that comes from reading. We've got lots of information and a great book list at the end of this call. So let's talk about the other part of balancing hormones, that is modulating and stabilizing estrogen levels. We always begin with a platform of good nutrition. The idea of nourishing your body so it will produce hormones needs to hit home here. And you know, we're a group of women who have been focusing on feeding and nourishing everybody else. We get to our mid-40s, our late 40s, and all of a sudden it's time for us. And we're not used to that. And so focusing on how we're going to nourish our bodies presents sometimes a problem for some people. I highly recommend the book, The Formula. The Dows have worked with Dr. Barry Sears. Dr. Sears' presentation on Building Strength webinars was excellent as well. And he is an advocate of eating 40% of your diet as carbohydrates, focusing on vegetables first, fruit only to fruit, and whole grains third, and probably restricting grains if you have a weight issue. 30% of your diet should be as protein. Good quality protein is the best. And then 30% of your diet as fats, and preferably incorporating some essential fatty acids into that. Increasing the fiber intake becomes point number 1 in stabilizing and modulating estrogen levels. Supplementally, we usually encourage that those who have insulin-resistant problems, anyone with elevated estrogen or elevated testosterone, the main way to remove those hormones and to stabilize your insulin is to increase your fiber intake. And so 30 grams of fiber isn't adequate for the average person who is hormonally challenged. We need to get our intake up to 50 grams a day. And so, you know, that becomes a little bit of a challenge. Whoops. One of the things that we do to increase our fiber intake is we use a fiber supplement to do that. The fiber supplement we recommend that you take it a teaspoon before breakfast, a teaspoon before lunch, and a teaspoon before dinner. And that way you're improving your fiber intake by approximately 15 grams a day. And with the goal of taking a full tablespoon, which is increasing your fiber intake even more by almost 30 grams a day. I read a study recently that told that if you increased your fiber by 30 grams, not take 30 grams, but whatever you're eating today, add 30 grams of fiber and walk 30 minutes a day, you will lose 10 pounds a month. And so if you're on this call and you want to lose weight, just get a hold of our fiber supplement and split it up between breakfast, lunch, and dinner and walk for 30 minutes, and that will be the beginnings of a great weight loss program. Increasing water consumption and exercise to 30 minutes a day is a part of a detox program. Remember that much of estrogen levels that are fluctuating need to be removed. And so increasing our water consumption, increasing our fiber, and doing exercise targets all three eliminative processes in the body. Every eliminative pathway is targeted. The bowel with fiber, the kidneys with water, and the skin with exercise. Now, in order for the skin to kick in, you'd have to be exercising until you perspire. So it's not a leisurely walk in the park. Next, an additional vitamin C is a part of our program to modulate and stabilize estrogen levels. And the reason why we're incorporating vitamin C is for adrenal support. We want to make sure that your body has an appropriate amount of support, and we are advocates of Dr. James Wilson's program in his book Adrenal Fatigue. And he says when people are under stress or experiencing adrenal fatigue, their body's need for vitamin C increases dramatically. So remember that your adrenals are searching for vitamin C so that they can take and make more cortisol. You want to make sure also that you have an adequate amount of progesterone there for your adrenals to thrive and survive as well. When delivered in an ascorbate form, vitamin C is one of the easiest forms in the body to assimilate. Now, we've had a vitamin C specifically made because we've observed that most people cannot take in vitamin C as an ascorbic acid in the amounts that Dr. Brownstein and Dr. Wilson are suggesting. And they're suggesting about 3 grams a day on the average for the hormonally challenged woman. Increasing indoles, which contain indole 3-carbinol, becomes the next point in a stabilizing program. Now, these indole 3-carbinol or indoles are found in cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale. If you're going to eat them, you would want to lightly steam them because they are also goitrogens. They can negatively affect the thyroid, but they positively affect estrogen levels. And this is just some of the things that I3C does. And we've created a supplement that has 300 milligrams of indoles per day. Indole 3-carbinol eliminates excess estrogen via the liver. Again, that's another excretory pathway that is very excellent. It increases the good estrogen, inhibits the bad. That's very, very important. And you know, it has a positive effect on symptoms. So it stops flooding, you know, periods that are excessive, especially for women in their 40s. It helps to reduce ovarian cysts, endometriosis, fibroids, acne, those kinds of things, because those are related to estrogen levels that are fluctuating and elevated. We've added a fruit and vegetable concentrate to our nutritional program simply because we believe that the majority of people do not eat perfect every single day. And so we've added a fruit and vegetable concentrate that is high in cruciferous vegetables for nutrient improvement. We also have added a moderate amount of calcium. I was just reading today, Dr. Lee was not an advocate of lots of calcium in the diet. And I think you're going to find that there's more and more studies coming out that suggest that over-consuming calcium is going to be a problem for women in that it will produce kidney stones and bone spurs and things like that. The RDA, the required daily amount of calcium, is around 1,200 to 1,500 a day. But that RDA means required daily amount. It means from everything that you consume in the course of the day. And if you eat really well, as I'm trusting that everyone on this call will do, and you're eating from a plant-based diet, you'll be getting the majority of your calcium from the foods that you're eating, probably about 1,000 calories, 1,000 units of calcium a day. So we have in our product calcium, which matches what Dr. Lee suggested, and that is to consume about 250 additional milligrams of calcium per day, and ours is made from seaweed. So again, watch where you're getting your supplements, where they are derived. If they're made in a chemistry lab, it's unlikely that the body is going to absorb them in the way that they will a plant-sourced product. So there we are. Fiber, increase your water consumption and exercise. Additional vitamin C, include indoles. Even if you eat them, increase the amount that you're eating. Use a fruit and vegetable concentrate to fill the gaps in your diet, and a little bit of calcium. Now, we've added D3. I want to spend a little bit of time on D3 because D3 is a vitamin that is now being considered a hormone. Vitamin D3 is also made from cholesterol. I could have put it at the top of the charts that we first started with. And according to Dr. Christine Northrup and others like her, there's a paradigm shift going on in medicine as to the new research revealing a far greater role for vitamin D. So 5 years ago, the range was 20 to 100 nanograms per mol. Well, that was considered normal then. That's not considered normal now. And I think it's going to go even higher than this. And Dr. Northrup says the same thing. Now, vitamin D3 is the natural human form of D3 that's made on the skin when you're out in the sun. And again, it's made from cholesterol. And it's not to be confused with D2. Now, I have a perfect example of this. I went with my mother to the doctor last week. And I asked him if my mom was on D3, on vitamin D. And he said, absolutely. And I said, is it D2 or D3? Now, unfortunately, I set him up because I knew that if he was writing a prescription, it's going to be D2, not D3. And when I got home, I checked. He did not know. He says, oh, it's got to be D3. And I got home, and I discovered that it was D2. And so we phoned the doctor and said, she's on D2. We want it stopped, and we're going to supply her with a D3 spray instead, so that she's not taking more pills. Low levels of vitamin D, such as 400 to 800 units, have not proven effective in many studies using D therapeutically. And this is Cedric Garland, who is doing a lot of research for the grassroots group and also for the Vitamin D Council. There's so much good research out there, just excellent, excellent research out there. Vitamin D has a connection to breast cancer. If you test vitamin D deficient breast cancer patients for vitamin D receptors, they will not have many. If you treat their deficiency, they will probably develop those receptors. Now, that's interesting in and of itself, that receptor sites are not available, but they develop. And I think that we need to recognize that testing for vitamin D3 is going to become a major issue, especially if you're on the call and you have a predisposition or are at risk for breast cancer. There's no question that where we live in the country is a perspective as well. They say that anywhere north of the 35th parallel, well, that's San Diego. And anywhere north of San Diego is probably going to be deficient. We've seen deficiencies in lower areas than that. If you have feared the sun in the past, that needs to change. Get out in mild sun with your body uncovered and uncovered with sunscreen for about 10 to 30 minutes a day, and in the summer months, and let's get some vitamin D3 going. We're suggesting that breast cancer patients with low vitamin D levels are going to need to get rocking on this. This could be the missing ingredient for women at risk with breast cancer. And this is a Canadian study that I thought was excellent. At an April 2006 cancer conference, evidence was presented that the risk of breast cancer was reduced by 50% with vitamin D in the blood. Now, again, perhaps this won't affect all of us that are on this call, but we all know someone who's developed breast cancer. And so please share the need for these people to be tested, evaluate, get a vitamin D3 test, and again, they are available on our Help for Hormones website. Get a vitamin D3 test and help to get going on improving vitamin D3 levels this summer. The test isn't difficult. It's easy to do. It's easy to obtain. Pop it into an envelope, and again, we take the perspective, test, don't guess. We encourage every woman to check her vitamin D levels regularly and keep it in the optimal range. That's Dr. Northrup. And it partly is because of breast issues. Now, we have put together a balance pack that include, and additionally, I've just come out with a vitamin D3 spray. All of us get tired of taking pills, and so our vitamin D3 spray is up on our website. Tonight, we've created this to help hormonally challenged men and women. Our Max Alive consultants are available to help and assist anyone on this call, and we'd be only too glad to do that. We have a document called Products in Our Program that if you want the studies that correlate between what I've just talked about, the fiber, the indoles, the vitamin C, if you want studies that correlate with that, all you have to do is contact me and ask for it. I would be glad to answer any and all questions. So let's review. Number one in our 5-step program is you must do a saliva test. Test, don't guess. And we provide a free review for anyone who's on this call not connected to Help for Hormones. We would be glad to go over your test results and help you with the next step. Number two is we can't do this for you. You have to determine you're going to eat the best food choices that you can possibly eat. And if you can get a hold of Dr. Barry Sears' presentation on building strength webinars, by all means, that will only help motivate you towards doing this. Number three, supplement the difference. If you're not getting 30 to 50 grams of fiber in your diet, you need to supplement. If you're not getting 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C per day in your nutrition as an ascorbate, then you need to supplement. If you're not getting 3 pounds of cruciferous vegetables in your diet, then you're not getting enough indoles to satisfy the studies that were done. A little bit of calcium, some fruit and vegetable concentrate to fill the gaps in the diet, and to consider a therapeutic amount of vitamin D3 if your test shows to be deficient. Last but not least, well, second to last, exercise. Exercise for all women helps us to maintain our testosterone levels. It helps us to reduce our fat, body fat, and in doing that, it reduces estrogen levels as well. So we have a double hit by exercising. And then lastly, if your saliva test shows that you need bioidentical hormones, by all means, then and only then do you go on bioidentical hormones. Once you're on a bioidentical hormone program, you test every single year, probably even every 6 months, to make sure that that things are staying where you want them to stay. This is my philosophy, and I'm sticking to this. When we accept responsibility for the health decisions that we have made in the past, and then begin to take responsibility for our own current hormone health, only then, folks, only then can we begin to move towards true wellness. Maximize your life, balance your hormones. Now we have, again, an excellent DVD presentation of this if you would like to share this with your friends. There's also a CD because we believe that women will listen over and over and over. Our goal is that you would develop such a strong understanding of this whole issue that you would make the very best choice for your own hormone health that you could possibly make. We are always looking for women and men who would like to become consultants. We have many practitioners and lay people who are involved with us, but we are certainly wanting to expand our borders. You know, in my naivety, I thought that I could do this all myself at one time. But what I delight in is training new people, new consultants to come in on board and offer a program that has great success in the lives of the women and men that we serve. And for many, this is a great way for us to end our working years, reaching out and helping others. I have a book list. I'm not going to leave this up too long, but I will for a little bit. And for those of you that order this webinar, I have an extensive list, as you can see, of information here, of references. So if you, but I believe you can only get that if you decide that you're going to order the webinar presentation from Dr. David. All right, I'm going to turn this over to you, David, and I think we're going to do a question and answer time.
Oh boy.
All right, David, are you there? Hello? Sherry, are you there?
Hold on just a minute.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
I can.
Hang on a minute.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
The mute button wouldn't switch off, so I apologize. Sorry about that.
Okay, not a problem.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was, as always, fantastic. Fantastic, and you managed to keep everybody on, except for one or two, for the entire close to 2 hours. Amazing. Amazing.
The hormonally challenged need help. What can I say?
Okay, that's a good point. All right, folks, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat box to the right of your screen. And we already have a few right here. I have a few of my own.
Should we do yours first?
Of course, I'm the host, right? I'm the one with the microphone, huh?
I wonder if we have many men on the line.
We have a few, but I have to say they are in the vast minority. I can tell you that right now.
So you're our token male. Isn't that wonderful, David?
That's right. That's right. We do need to throw in some testosterone in the mix somehow, shouldn't we?
That'll be next time.
Yes, and next week, look, did you tell them the dates? 22nd, folks. On the 22nd, Jackie is going to do an exclusive. Why don't you go ahead, Jackie, and tell us about the 22nd?
Sure, I'd be glad to, because I really have designed not to do seminars and webinar or anything on men's hormones, because the men don't show up. It's too much of a personal issue. I think that doing a webinar, that they'll come on because we won't be able to see them, and they'll be able to sit quietly in behind. I think that's a wonderful idea. So this will be the only way anyone would ever be able to hear my information on men's hormone health, is to be on this webinar, because I don't present it any other place.
Oh, that's great. We're really honored that you would do that for us. And folks, if you're a man and you want to join the webinar, it's okay. You can put in your wife's name. That's fine. You can just join with your wife's name, and that'll be okay. That one actually will be paid. Will be a paid webinar, and so we will send you the information later on. Okay. Now, some doctors, some endocrinologists, we talked about estrogen dominance, estrogen being out of balance, and estrogen excess. And my question was, some doctors believe that estradiol, which has so many wonderful properties, including antioxidant properties and all other things that it does, that they feel that is safe and that can be used. Now, when you talk about estrogen dominance, which one are you referring to? That has which estrogen are you referring to?
Well, those of us that have been doing saliva testing believe that estrogen is estrogen is estrogen. So I don't believe that in excess there is any safe estrogen. I think that one of the things that Dr. David Zava said, he's a breast cancer researcher, wrote the book with Dr. Lee, What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Breast Cancer. His comment was, estrogen is the angel of life, but it is also a key to death if it becomes excessive. And it won't matter how the excessive comes, whether it's xenoestrogens, whether it's eating too much soy, whether it is coming in from hormone replacement therapy, whether your own body is making too much. Estrogen is estrogen is estrogen, and if it exceeds what your body can handle, and if it is, David, unopposed by an adequate amount of progesterone, then it puts a woman's body at risk. It won't matter which kind.
Really? Oh,
well,
wow.
remember that E1 estrogen can become E2. If we go back to the original, biosynthetic pathway, E1 and E2 go back and forth between each other. So it's E1 that's produced in our fat cells, but it quickly becomes E2. And so that is the cancer-causing estrogen, as well as the life-giving estrogen. So what we're trying to say here, we don't want to scare people into thinking that estrogen is unsafe. Estrogen out of balance is unsafe.
Got it. That is the key.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. All right. Can a few thank yous here. Thank you so much, Jackie. Great to hear you tonight. I am on BioHRT, and I sometimes rub my progesterone cream on my feet. Is this okay as well?
Absolutely. Especially sometimes on the tops of the feet, there are lots of blood vessels that show there, but the palms of the hands and the bottom of the feet, as long as you don't have a lot of calluses, are great receptor sites for progesterone.
Really? And do they get absorbed well there as well?
Quickly, very quickly. I thought it was interesting. Dr. Mead's presentation showed a lady who had topical progesterone applied to her breast tissue for a 24-hour period. And remember, he showed the 2 slides of thermography. They did a thermogram of her breast before they started, and she had this large over her right breast red area. And red means that there's lots of capillary and blood vessel activity, which could indicate, some sort of cancer on the thermogram. After applying progesterone for just 24 hours, she came back in, she did a thermogram. It was more than 50% reduced. Probably it was 2/3 reduced. So we know that the application, topical application of progesterone gets to the receptor sites in minutes and begins to become active. Now, he also indicated, and this is for people who are on progesterone therapies right now, or using progesterone therapeutically, it takes up to 30 days for sufficiency to be released, to be achieved. But they will see results. I mean, the progesterone gets into the receptor sites within minutes.
And
Very
it's amazing
cool.
It's amazing that you mentioned that the brain has the most receptor sites for progesterone. I mean, that is I only heard that for the first time from you. And
well, yes. I think that the other thing that goes along with that is that a lot of physicians are taught that the largest number of receptor sites for progesterone are in the uterus. So if a woman has her uterus removed, she doesn't need progesterone. So we're seeing a lot of women that are progesterone deficient, and they're having all kinds of, menopausal mental issues, and they feel like they're losing their minds, but they're not. It really is a hormone imbalance.
And it's also interesting that you mentioned iodine as well, and we'll be working on Dr. Mead to come back on to do something on iodine as well and vitamin D3.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to read something about iodine and estrogen, and I got this from the iodine book by Dr. David Brownstein. Dr. Wright, Jonathan Wright, is the senior physician at the Tacoma Clinic. He also writes for Life Extension. Dr. Wright has reported compelling data that iodine in the form of Lugol solution, iodide and iodine, can maintain the correct balance of the 3 estrogens. Specifically, Dr. Wright has reported that Lugol solution will help the body metabolize the estrogens to favor the safer form, estriol. And Dr. Brownstein says, my experience has found the same results. The use of iodine helps to maintain a balanced estrogen ratio in favor of estriol, which is E3 estrogen. So, I think that what's going to happen here is, we can't rely on just one thing. It's not just about progesterone. I hope everyone on the call heard that. but testing for iodine insufficiency, testing for D3, it's going to be a combination of things. And isn't that what life is? Life is much more complex than a magic cream, isn't it?
Right, absolutely. And that's what we say. There's no one single magic bullet. It's a combination of things, absolutely. Okay, what determines how much additional progesterone is needed? Thank you very much. I guess that's the saliva test, right? That helps you narrow things down.
Absolutely. It will tell us how insufficient you are, and then it will, you know, there's usually a parameter with which we start a person, and then you test in 6 months to see if that's working, and if that works, then you're on your own for a year. Most of us test every year.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So first time test, and then you're going to get on a program, and then do you have to monitor it after a couple of months after when you just get on the program, or how does that work?
When people work with our Max Alive consultants and Help for Hormones, we're with them all the way through. It's a coaching program, and so if they need to have someone like myself on a call at 3 months, they want their program tweaked, they want to, you know, come back and revisit it, I make myself available, as do all of my consultants. I mean, one of the things that we've recognized, you know, the programs that are out there, and I shared this the other night on a call, and it seemed to be a remarkable thing, but I spoke to a woman who was invited on to Oprah, and the program, I mean, because she was hormonally challenged, she had shared her problems, and they invited her on to go on their program. They never did resolve her issues. The cost was $5,000. Now, she did not have to pay. They covered the expense, but the cost was $5,000, and I don't think people realize that most hormone balancing programs that you're going to observe on Oprah or Dr. Phil, or, you know, are very costly. I was speaking to a woman in Toronto, and she, with her doctor, all she did was a saliva test and began a progesterone program. No supplements, no anything else. $800 to just get started. These programs are horrifically priced. Now, I can assure you, with a saliva test of $150, and a beginning program, a tube of progesterone cream is about $30, and the supplement program is about $60. Most women can resolve their issues on that program within 6 months. So, David, we're not talking about a lot of money, but we are talking about women having to make a contribution here by doing it.
I just had someone text me and say, this gives me hope.
Well, I want to give her hope. God bless her. I'd hug her if she was here. You know, we have many women that leave our live seminars. They weep because of all they've been through. And they didn't realize what it was, but they've been, you know, I mean, they've had their uteruses out, they have had breasts removed, they've been told that it's all in their head, they're on antidepressants. You know, everything's skirting around the issue. Nothing is resolving it. And I believe that the tests that we're offering help to pinpoint the problem and resolve the issue.
Now let me venture to ask you for a figure. What percentage-wise? I mean, you can't be batting 100%. So what would be your batting average?
Well,
if the people follow your program.
83% will resolve their issues within 6 months.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
And you saw Dr. Eldridge Taylor, he says the same thing, 83%. And that seems to be very consistent.
That is hard to believe, Jackie, but it's coming from you, so I'm going to have to accept that. Well,
I know. And just remember that the doctors that approached that, her name is Shelley, from Oprah, they never resolved her hormones. They never did.
Wow.
You know, part of the problem is that we take that multi-pronged approach. We address the diet. We address the exercise. We talk about nutrition, and we talk about supplementation, and then we talk about bioidentical hormones. So, you know, it's a whole program that very much appeals to practitioners, I'll tell you. A practitioner will get great results if they all monitor their people on this, and they do. They absolutely do.
Speaking about practitioners, there's a question. If one were to order the saliva kit and do the test, can we expect our doctors to accept this testing service?
They may not accept it, but what I've done with my physician, who I rarely go to see, I have to laugh because I watched Christine Northrup the other night, and she says she hasn't been to her doctor very often either. I haven't been for probably 3 years. What happens is I take my saliva test results into my physician when I go once every 3 or 4 years, and I tell him to please file these in my file. And I tell him, you know, you may not consider them to be of value, but I believe that someday they will be. You and I heard Dr. Mead say that someday saliva testing is going to come into its own. And then our doctors will have the advantage of having some of these tests on file. I don't ask for my physician's opinion. I'm not asking him to even endorse what I'm doing. I feel well. My husband, you know, and I are probably healthier than the majority of people. We are drug-free, folks. I mean, how many people could? My husband is 70 and I'm 63, and we don't take any drugs. We don't even take aspirin. Wow. And our goal is to remain drug-free. I mean, as long as we can, let's put it off.
Wow, that's pretty good for a 70-year-old not to be taking drugs. That's huge.
It's huge. Yeah, no high blood. We have no high blood pressure, neither he nor I.
So this thing works, in other words. This thing works. Okay.
Yes.
Here's another question. Can you tell me why you get a headache before your period and a feeling of fullness in your head?
Yes, that's water retention is going to be one thing, and because your body didn't produce enough progesterone. Dr. Lee addresses this in that when he says that for some women they'll also get a real fullness in their breasts when they first start progesterone, but it is residual from estrogen dominance. Too much estrogen still in the system, not enough progesterone. Progesterone acts like a diuretic. So a diuretic will get rid of the water, that fullness feeling. So I would say she should test her hormones. I think she'll be surprised.
I think everybody should, really.
I do too, David. You're next.
I'm getting ready. Okay, can you do the hormone test if you have a cold or flu?
Absolutely. Those don't
It's not gonna
affect hormone
results.
levels.
Okay. Okay, all right. Someone says, what is the optimal range for vitamin D blood levels?
Well, again, somewhere between 70 and 100, I think. 50 and 100 is probably more where they're going to be heading, and they're probably going to be heading to the upper end of 100.
Okay. And this is ready now with at Labrick at the
Yes.
you test. Okay.
Yep. We have access to the test now. Nobody can go directly to Labrix to purchase. They would have to come through us first. Even practitioners. Dr. Mead has requested that we talk to any practitioners who are on the call. If you want to deal with their test kits, that you would come through us. A couple of things that they've done for my Help for Hormones team. We have specific lab review sheets that are unique just to our group. So they've created them for Help for Hormones, and if you want access to those, you would have to contact us. And they like it if you have a one-on-one training, and I do a lot of training. I train all kinds of practitioners.
Well, that seems like a pretty good collaboration you have with Labrix then, because they do the scientific work and the testing, but they need people like you to help make it happen.
Well, and you know, it isn't just about, it's knowing the little innuendos. You know, you as a physician understand that when you can become so familiar with something that you see little things that others would miss. And so I teach practitioners to observe those little things, and they get them right away. We want the very best test result for the client, for sure. And so I can help the practitioner get that.
Great, great. And just as a small correction, Jackie, your email address has a dot before the @gmail.com, and that may throw people. So just so you know. Okay.
Sorry.
Here's a question. Can you talk about iodine and bromide? I have heard that iodine can be affected by the bromide in your body. Do you test for both at the same time?
Okay, interesting. In Dr. Brownstein's book, and I've heard Dr. Brownstein personally, and I would encourage anyone to go on to his website and order his books, but he talks about the periodic table, if you can envision it, and fluorine, chlorine, and bromine are all in the same line with iodine below. So that means iodine is the heavier mineral. Fluorine, chlorine, and bromine can sit in the receptor site that would normally host iodine if there is not an adequate amount of iodine present. So it isn't just about bromine. It is about chlorine and fluorine. So if they do fluorine in your water, if you do swim in a chlorinated pool, or if you eat foods, or pools are also brominated, or if you eat foods that are too high in bromine, all of those three can actually displace iodine if it's not there in a large amount. So when you ingest, if your iodine test shows that you have low iodine, you start to ingest iodine at 50 milligrams, which is 4 tablets of iodoral per day. It will displace bromine and fluorine and chlorine. And I believe it will displace the heavier ones first. And so I've seen on his slides, Dr. Brownstein's slides, where he shows that people have yellow nails from getting their bodies trying to get rid of the bromine. We don't test for those other halides. I don't know if there is even a test for those other halides. But we do test, and if iodine levels are low, then we take a nice gentle path towards improving iodine levels with people. There's lots of information on the iodine group about how to do a salt diet. He believes in using Himalayan salt or Celtic salt to help relieve the bromine and chlorine from the system. I have children who swim in chlorinated pools, and I was very concerned. They're all lifeguards, and so they don't have an option. They have to teach all day in chlorinated pools, and my one son teaches in a brominated pool, so it wasn't any better. And so when I've tested 2 of the 6 that are lifeguards so far, and they all test very low in iodine. So we're slowly bringing up their iodine levels. But in answer to, do we test bromine? We don't test bromine. We only test iodine.
Wow.
I know. It's something else, isn't it? It's like another world, David. It's like another world out there. I want to share this too. This is something that's a little new as well. I've come across a couple of people with MS. And I remembered a reference by Dr. Lee, and I'm going to read from his medical newsletter, February '99. And she says, "My husband has MS. I read in your book that progesterone is involved in the formation of the myelin nerve sheath, which is exactly what deteriorates in MS. Would it be okay for my husband to use progesterone? And if so, how much should he use?" His response was, "There is good evidence that progesterone is an important factor in maintaining the myelin sheath that surrounds and protects peripheral nerves, the nerves that emanate from the spinal cord and pass through our body. At present, there is no completed study, to my knowledge, that shows whether or not the same is true for the demyelination in the central nervous system, that is the brain and spinal cord, where MS occurs. However, there is no known reason not to use progesterone cream. If I had MS, I would try it," he says. "In my practice, I recommend 10 milligrams a day for men. I recommend that women who have MS test for progesterone deficiencies. And you know what? The women with MS have low progesterone.
Is it severely low, lower than on average, or just what you regularly see with people?
No, in the basement. Yeah.
Wow. This is amazing.
It is. It's a remarkable hormone, and Dr. Lee wrote a book called Progesterone, the Remarkable Hormone. He wrote it for doctors, but I don't know how many read it.
It would certainly change their practice if they did, huh?
It would. And you know, there are a few really forward-thinking physicians out there in the United States that are doing this, and God bless them. The doctor that's on my DVD also is doing this. He's not doing it for any extra income. He doesn't charge hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a bioidentical hormone program, and these physicians are to be certainly commended.
Absolutely. Can one purchase the iodine supplement through your Health for Hormone website?
Yes, they certainly may, but we would, and you can do that, but I would highly recommend that you do an iodine sufficiency test first.
That makes sense. Is bloatedness and weight around the midsection too much estrogen and not enough progesterone?
It could be. We also call it fat deposition by cortisol.
Stress, huh? Yeah.
Which means too much stress, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, what tends to happen is a woman goes on a hormone balancing program and she'll find it a lot easier to lose weight.
Yeah, plus all the other things like you mentioned as well.
Absolutely.
I like the fact, and by the way, fiber, that you made a great point about fiber. Fiber is so important in the whole weight loss thing that I think it's heavily underrated.
Absolutely.
Very, very important.
Absolutely.
Okay, here's a great question. Why take a saliva test 4 times a day instead of only at 8 a.m. one time?
Well, the thought originally was that all hormones are highest in the morning. We do know now that you should really do your saliva test about a half an hour after waking, because cortisol levels really come up in that time frame. There's no question that hormone levels are, for the most part, high, but Dr. Mead has research that shows that hormone levels go up and down throughout the day. So they've picked the 4 main times in the day, and then they average it. And believe it or not, I've used another lab for a long time, and we're getting better results, more consistent results from Dr. Mead's lab when we take the 4 specimens. So it's a much more accurate read. Hormones fluctuate throughout the day. That is a fact.
Right. Great. Okay, well, I have just 1 or 2 more questions, and we'll let you go. I know you're probably thirsty and hungry right now and tired. But then again, you do presentations for the whole day, don't you, Jackie? This should be like a walk in the park.
Oh, I have done. You know that most evening presentations, if we start at 7, I don't get out of the room till 10:30 at night. and usually, and my common phrase, I'm using that at most of the seminars. I look around the room and I just know, like, they're afraid to leave because they're going to miss something, and I'm sure that's women on the call now. They're afraid they're going to miss something that's really important. So at the appropriate time, I'll say, "Stick me with a fork, I'm done." That's my favorite saying.
Too bad we can't do that over here. You're too far away.
No, I know. And that's why I can say it. Okay, let's have another question.
I am Christine. I'm Christine. I am on my husband's computer. Okay. I'm very grateful to have heard the presentation. I have 3 daughters with CF and have a hard time with having adequate vitamin D levels. I will contact you via your website. Also, my mom is 92, and her only med is a thyroid pill, as she has had part of her thyroid removed about 30 years ago. I was fascinated with the fast results you talked about with the older woman lying in bed and not relating to others. This is the state of my mother's health right now. So she probably needs to go to have her mother get tested and checked out too, huh?
Well, you know, with the 90-year-olds, I would just give them progesterone. You're just going to assume that they're going to need it. The same thing with vitamin D3. I wouldn't necessarily test these elderly folk. Just know if they're lying in bed, where are they getting their vitamin D3 from?
Right.
Now, my mom is active, you know, and so my mom is out and about all the time. So, you know, understanding that when a person is bedridden, chances are their vitamin D3 is going to be low. Chances are their progesterone level is going to be low. I would just put them on it.
Right.
I would just do it. And I would be more than glad to help.
Nothing to worry.
I would be more than glad to guide her. There is nothing, the small amount of progesterone that her mom would need wouldn't be a problem. I would want to look at her mom's diet. There's, you know, other factors that will keep her mother healthy.
Right.
My mom's on iodine too.
Oh yeah, this is such important. Okay, one more comment. Oh, someone just threw something in. Okay, but hi Jackie, good job. This is Stephen Ferguson. I guess you know who that is.
Oh, he's a physician, delightful gentleman he is. He's a gentleman who does hormones in his practice, and he doesn't charge ultimate amounts of money. Stephen, God bless you.
Well, I had another doctor who he runs osteoporosis clinic, and he was on for your webinar, and he's very, very technical. The engineer, he was an engineer before he became an MD, and he'd been very critical of some of my webinars in the past, but I haven't listened to yours. He said he had to tell me, he said this is good science. So he said like he was really impressed with what you shared. So that's why we keep getting you back.
Well, and you know what? I think that with every single person on the call, it is resonating with them as truthful information, and that's why it's important. What we believe is truth, we will move forward with, and it's important, and it's not good enough to just listen. Every person on the call has to do something with this information.
Otherwise, it's useless, right?
Absolutely. Then I've spoken for 2 hours for nothing. So move forward. Some of the directions they could take. Certainly, you know, go on the website, order a test kit. That's a great start.
I agree.
Absolutely. Start reading. You know, ask me for the book list. I'll send them a book list. Order the whole DVD presentation and watch it again.
Yes, folks, the DVD presentation will be available afterwards, yes.
Yes, your webinar information. You're going to make it available to them. They can order it and watch it. The cost is minimal just for you to set it up. I mean, you're not making a profit off of this. I can't get over this. But nevertheless, I think that, you know, that this, you know, watch it 10 times until they get it. I mean, there's a variety of steps that they can take to be able to move forward appropriately and for their own hormone health's sake, for sure.
Well, thank you, Jackie, for putting the plug in for us.
Oh, I like your seminars. What I do is I download them and save them until I can listen to them. And so anyone on the call can do the same thing as me. I can't always be there on a Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday night. But I can download them and I can save them to my computer. And I've watched Dr. Elizabeth Owings on vitamin D3. She was outstanding. I've listened to Dr. Barry Sears. He was awesome. And I've listened to Dr. Mead twice. I downloaded it and I've watched it twice already.
Wow.
So I think what you're offering people is outstanding. I really do. And you are to be commended, David.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we have also been very, very fortunate to have people like all the people you mentioned and you who have been willing to give up their time to provide this information free of charge.
All right. Let's call it a night. Stick me with a port.
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you so much again, Jackie, and we'll be having you again on the 22nd. That's 3 Tuesdays from today, I guess.
Very good.
And folks, thank you for joining us. We will call it a night. So God bless. Have a great night. Thank you, Jackie.
Okay.
All right.